I came home from the hospital the same day my husband was buried, and when I pushed open the front door, I could smell his cologne still hanging in the air. That was the moment I almost broke. But I did not get to break, because my mother-in-law and sister-in-law were already sitting at my kitchen table, spreading documents across the surface like they owned the place. They did not hear me come in. And what I heard next changed everything. My name is Felicity. I am 31 years old. My husband Brandon died of a ruptured brain aneurysm on a Tuesday morning. He was 34. He had been complaining of headaches for a week, and I had finally convinced him to go in for a scan. He never came home from that appointment. I got the phone call while I was at work, standing in the middle of a busy hospital corridor, and the floor just disappeared beneath me. Brandon was a quiet, careful man. He was a software architect. He did not wear expensive clothes or drive a flashy car. He packed his lunch every single day in the same blue thermos we had bought together at a farmer's market 3 years ago. Nobody who looked at him from the outside would have guessed that he had spent the last 7 years building something enormous in silence. I want you to understand who he was before I tell you what happened after he died. Because the people who came into my home the week of his funeral had a very specific idea of who Brandon was, and that idea was completely wrong. They thought he was ordinary. They thought he was boring. They thought he had nothing. And they thought, by extension, that I had nothing. They were wrong on every single count. I found out about the trust 4 days before the funeral, when a certified letter arrived from a law firm I had never heard of, addressed to me personally. I almost did not open it that day. I was barely functioning. I was sleeping in Brandon's flannel shirt because it still smelled like him, and I was eating crackers over the kitchen sink because cooking felt impossible. But something about the weight of the envelope made me sit down at the table and open it carefully. The letter was from an estate attorney named Mr. Hargrove. It said that as the sole beneficiary of the Brandon Calloway Living Trust, I was being formally notified of the trust's contents and invited to schedule a meeting at my earliest convenience. There was a number at the bottom of the page. I stared at the paper for a long time. Then I called Mr. Paper for a long time. Hargrove was a calm, measured man who spoke like every word cost him something. He confirmed that Brandon had established the trust 6 years ago, 2 years before we even got married, and had updated it quietly after our wedding. He said Brandon had been meticulous. He said the total value of the trust, including liquid assets and equity holdings in 3 early-stage technology companies Brandon had co-founded and later sold partial stakes in, came to just over $92 million. I sat down on the kitchen floor with the phone against my ear and said nothing for almost a full minute. I had known Brandon was good at his work. I had known he made solid money. But he had always lived simply, and I had never pried into his finances the way some couples do. We had a joint account for household expenses, and we each kept our own savings separately, an arrangement that felt comfortable and respectful. I did not know. He had wanted to surprise me, Mr. Hargrove said gently. He had been planning to tell me on our 4th anniversary, which was 3 months away. I cried for a long time after that call. Not because of the money. Because of the version of him I was still discovering, even after he was gone. I went to the meeting with Mr. Hargrove the morning of the funeral. I sat in a leather chair across from his desk and signed the paperwork to begin the process of formally transferring the trust into my name. He gave me a thick manila folder and told me to keep it somewhere safe. He also told me something else, something that Brandon had specifically instructed him to say if this moment ever came. Be careful who you tell, and when. Brandon had known his family well. I slipped the folder into my tote bag and went to bury my husband. The service was small. Brandon had not wanted a fuss. Afterward, his mother and sister came back to our house with a few other relatives, and I let them in because I did not know what else to do. I was in autopilot. I was going through the motions of being a grieving widow at her own reception, accepting casseroles I would never eat, and hearing the word strong more times than I could count. His mother had always been cool toward me, polite, but cool, in the way that made you feel like you were always one wrong move from being asked to leave. His sister was warmer on the surface, but had a particular talent for comments that sounded like compliments until you thought about them later. They had never fully accepted that Brandon chose me, a hospital billing coordinator with a state school degree and no family connections, over the kind of woman they had imagined for him. By 9 o'clock, most of the guests had left. I was exhausted in a way that went past the body and into something deeper. I went upstairs to change out of my black dress and splash cold water on my face. I was up there for maybe 10 minutes. When I came back downstairs, I stopped at the bottom of the stairs. His mother and his sister were still at the kitchen table. They had not noticed me. The door between the hallway and the kitchen was slightly open, and their voices carried easily in the quiet of the empty house. His sister was talking first. Her voice was low and practical, the way it always got when she was organizing something. She said that the house was the obvious first step. She said that Brandon had clearly not left a will, or if he had, it probably had not been updated since before the marriage, which would complicate things for me considerably. She said there were provisions in their state for a spouse of fewer than 5 years, and that depending on what Brandon actually had, there might be room to contest. His mother said she had already spoken to someone. She used the phrase, "our attorney," with a kind of ownership that turned my stomach. She said that the key was to move while I was still in shock, before I had a chance to get my own legal counsel. She said I was not a complicated woman, and she said it like it was a fact and not an insult. She said that if they came to me with paperwork that looked official and offered to help manage things, I would probably sign whatever they put in front of me, because I trusted family, and because I was not, in her words, particularly financially sophisticated. His sister said they should also think about the car. Brandon had a car that had been paid off worth about $30,000, and she felt that since he had bought it before we were married, there was a reasonable argument that it should revert to the family estate rather than to me. His mother agreed. Then she said the house was worth at least $600,000. She said if they could get me to sign a document giving them temporary oversight of the estate while the legal process sorted itself out, they could effectively freeze my access to any assets and push for a settlement that favored the family. She said, and I remember this part with perfect clarity, that I had no idea what I was dealing with, and that was exactly what they were counting on. I stood in that hallway for what felt like a very long time. My tote bag was sitting on the entryway table, 3 feet from where I was standing, with $92 million of documentation inside it. My hands were completely still. I noticed that. I expected them to shake, but they did not. I thought about what Brandon had told Mr. Hargrove to say. Be careful who you tell, and when. I took a breath. I thought about what I did for a living. Not billing coordination, which is what I had been doing for the past 2 years. Before that, I had spent 4 years as a forensic billing analyst for a regional hospital network, tracking insurance fraud, identifying discrepancy patterns in financial records, and working closely with compliance attorneys on audit responses. I had spent years learning how people tried to take money that did not belong to them, and how they left themselves exposed when they did. I was not the woman they thought I was. I wiped my face, softened my shoulders, and walked into the kitchen. They both looked up. His mother arranged her face into something sympathetic very quickly. His sister reached over and touched my hand and said she was so glad I had come back down, that they had been talking and they just wanted me to know they were there for me, completely, whatever I needed. I sat down at my own kitchen table and told them I was overwhelmed. I let my voice go a little thin and watery. I said I did not understand any of this. The legal side, the estate, any of it. I said I was scared about money because I had not known what Brandon had or did not have, and I was terrified of ending up without a home. His mother reached across the table and covered my hand with hers. She told me not to worry. She told me that is exactly why family was so important at a time like this. She said they wanted to help me navigate everything, and that their attorney was actually very experienced with estates and could make sure things were handled efficiently. She said the word efficiently with just enough emphasis that I knew what she meant. 2 days later, they came back to the house. His mother and his sister, and a man, his mother introduced as their family's estate attorney. He had a briefcase and a careful smile and the particular energy of a person who is used to dealing with people in vulnerable situations. He sat across from me at the same kitchen table and laid out what he called a temporary estate management agreement. He explained it in terms that were deliberately vague, using phrases like administrative oversight and protective fiduciary arrangement, while never quite saying directly what the document actually authorized. I had read it the night before. His mother had emailed it to me, which was either very bold or very careless, probably both. The document was asking me to hand over decision-making authority for all assets connected to Brandon's estate to a named trustee, who happened to be his mother, while the estate was being processed. It looked official. It had a notary seal template at the bottom. But the language in paragraph 7, buried under a lot of reassuring language about protecting my interests, authorized the trustee to make binding financial decisions on behalf of the estate without requiring my signature. If I had signed it, I would have handed her control of everything before I had formally claimed anything. I sat across from the attorney and let my expression stay carefully uncertain. I asked a few soft questions. I said the words, "I just don't want to make a mistake," twice, which seemed to reassure all three of them considerably. Then I asked if I could have another day to think it over. Just one day. I said I had not been sleeping and I wanted to make sure I understood what I was signing. His mother said, "Of course, sweetheart. Take all the time you need," in a tone that meant, "Please sign it by tomorrow morning." The moment they left, I called Mr. Hargrove. He was quiet while I described the document. Then he said, clearly and without drama, that what they were attempting was not legal, and that if they pushed further it could constitute other financial abuse statutes extended to spousal situations, depending on how the court framed it. He told me to photograph the document and email it to him immediately, which I did. He said to keep the email thread. He said to document every interaction going forward. Date. Time. What was said. I told him I needed one more thing. I told him what Brandon had made me do 3 years ago, when he was going through a phase of reading about identity theft and financial fraud. He had made us both register what he called a marker signature with Mr. Hargrove's office, a specific version of our signatures with 2 deliberate alterations, a dropped loop, and an exaggerated first letter, that was filed with the trust documentation as a signal flag. If that signature ever appeared on a document, it automatically triggered a fraud review and rendered the document legally void. Brandon had been so earnest about it, he had explained it to me like a puzzle he was proud of. I had signed the registration form and teased him a little about being paranoid. I was no longer teasing him. The next morning, they came back for the signed document. His mother sat at my table with her hands folded, and her attorney had his briefcase open and his pen ready. His sister stood near the window and looked at her phone like the outcome was already settled. I picked up the pen. I let my hand hover over the signature line for just a moment, long enough to look hesitant. Then I signed it, deliberately, with the marker signature. The dropped loop, the exaggerated F. His mother took the document, looked at it briefly, and tucked it into the attorney's briefcase with the satisfied air of someone who had just won something they had been after for a long time. I said thank you. I said I felt better knowing they were handling it. I watched them to the door. When it clicked shut behind them, I called Mr. Hargrove and told him the flag had been triggered. He said he would notify the relevant parties immediately. What I had not told them, and what they had no way of knowing, was that 2 of the 3 technology companies whose equity was held in the trust were currently leasing server space and office infrastructure from a commercial real estate and technology asset management company, a company in which Brandon had quietly maintained a 12% equity stake that I had just been formally assigned. One of those companies was the primary client account, making up 60% of the annual revenue of a boutique investment consulting firm that his sister had recently joined as a senior associate. She was building her career on a client she did not know I now had a direct financial interest in. I found this out by doing what I do, which is reading financial documents carefully and following the numbers until they told me something. I did not do anything with that information right away. I let it sit. 3 days later, his mother called me and said there was a problem with the document I had signed. Her attorney had flagged some irregularities. She was calm on the phone, but her voice had a tightness in it that had not been there before. She said they needed me to come in and sign a corrected version. I told her I would be happy to, and I asked if we could do it at Mr. Hargrove's office, since he was handling the estate and it seemed sensible to have everyone in the same room. She paused for just long enough to tell me everything. Then she said that sounded like a wonderful idea. We met on a Thursday morning. His mother and her attorney sat on one side of the conference table. Mr. Hargrove and I sat on the other side. I had brought a folder of my own. His sister had not come, which I noted. His mother's attorney presented the corrected document and began explaining it. Mr. Hargrove let him finish. Then he opened his own folder and placed a single sheet of paper on the table. It was the trust summary, $92 million, Brandon's name, my name as sole beneficiary, and the date it had last been updated, which was 18 months ago, the month we had come back from a weekend trip to the coast where Brandon had spent one afternoon on his laptop while I read on the porch, and had seemed unusually thoughtful at dinner. He had been updating my inheritance while I read paperback novels 20 feet away. The attorney across the table went very still when he saw the number. His mother looked at the paper. Then she looked at me. Her expression went through several things in quick succession. Mr. Hargrove then explained, in precise and unhurried language, that the document I had signed at my kitchen table contained a marker signature legally registered with the trust as a fraud alert mechanism. The signature had triggered an automatic review. The document was void, and because the document had been submitted to 2 financial institutions in an attempt to access estate funds before the trust had been formally transferred, the submission constituted attempted financial fraud. He slid a second sheet across the table. It was a formal notice that the matter had been referred to the State Attorney General's Financial Crimes Division. His mother's attorney said very quietly that his client had not been fully informed of the nature of the documents she had been asked to manage on her son's behalf. He said this like he was reading from a script he had just written in his head. It was not a convincing performance. Mr. Hargrove said that the investigation would determine that. I had not said a single word since we sat down. I looked at his mother across the table. She was looking at her hands. She looked old in that moment, older than I had ever seen her. And I felt something that surprised me. Not satisfaction exactly, but a kind of grief inside the grief. She had lost her son, and instead of sitting with that, she had spent the 2 weeks since his death trying to take from his wife. I did not understand it. I do not think I ever will. I said quietly that I hoped they would let the process move forward without complicating things further. I said it gently. I meant it. We left the meeting first. In the weeks that followed, the investigation proceeded. The Attorney General's office sent several requests for documentation to his mother and to her attorney. It emerged during that process that his mother had taken out a personal loan 18 months prior using a piece of property Brandon had helped her purchase as collateral, and had not disclosed this when presenting herself as a fiduciary candidate in the temporary management agreement. It also emerged that the family attorney she had hired was not licensed to practice estate law in our state. He had a general practice license and had never handled a trust of any complexity. His mother did not go to prison, but she paid significant legal fees, repaid a portion of costs associated with the fraud review, and was formally barred from any role in the estate proceedings. She retained her own attorney for that process, which cost her considerably. His sister's position at the investment firm became complicated when the firm conducted its own internal review after being contacted by the estate. She had not done anything technically illegal, but her connection to a client entity in which the estate held interest required disclosure she had not made when she was hired. She resigned before they could ask her to leave. Last I heard, she was freelancing. I sold the house eventually, not because I had to, but because I could not sleep there without dreaming about that hallway, about standing at the bottom of the stairs and hearing what family sounds like when it thinks no one is listening. I bought a smaller place, a house with a porch and a garden and good light in the morning, in a neighborhood I had always liked. I had Brandon's blue thermos on the kitchen windowsill. I kept working for a while. Then I took a year off to figure out what I wanted to do next. I am currently finishing a certification in financial advocacy so I can work with surviving spouses and estate beneficiaries who do not have anyone in their corner when the paperwork starts to arrive. It is the kind of work Brandon would have thought was exactly right for me. He was always better at seeing me clearly than I was. I think about what his mother said that night when she did not know I was listening. That I was not particularly financially sophisticated. That I would sign whatever was put in front of me because I trusted family. She was half right about one thing. I do trust people. I trusted Brandon, completely and without reservation, and he spent years quietly building something to protect me in case he was not there to do it himself. That kind of trust is not naivety. That is just what love looks like when it is patient and honest and paying attention. The people who confuse love with weakness always eventually run into its consequences. They just usually don't see it coming. I have had people ask me since, people who know parts of the story, whether I feel guilty about how it ended for his mother. I sit with that question seriously when it comes up. I do not think guilt is the right word. I feel sad about it. I feel sad that the month after her son died, the version of herself she chose was the one that tried to steal from his widow. I feel sad that whatever she was afraid of, whatever scarcity lived inside her, was bigger than her grief. But I also know that I did not create that in her. I just declined to be its victim. If you have ever had to stand very still in a hallway and make a decision about who you are going to be, I think you know exactly what that moment feels like. The grief and the clarity arriving at the same time. The understanding that protecting yourself is not a betrayal of love. That sometimes the most honest thing you can do is let people's choices about who they are become the final word on the matter. Brandon left me something I did not know about. But he also left me myself, which was the quieter gift, and the one I am still learning how to use. If this story stayed with you, I would love to hear yours in the comments. And if you are new here, welcome to Recovery Stories. We tell the truth about hard things, and we do it together. There is something nobody tells you about betrayal inside a family. It does not arrive with warning signs or dramatic music. It arrives quietly, at your own kitchen table, in the voices of people you have known for years. While you are still wearing the clothes you buried someone in, I have had a lot of time to sit with what happened, and the thing I keep coming back to is this. What my mother-in-law and sister-in-law chose to do in those first 2 weeks after Brandon died was not a sudden decision. It was a conclusion they had been moving toward for a long time. The greed was not new. The crisis just removed whatever thin layer of social decency had been keeping it out of sight. People do not become who they are in moments of pressure. They just stop hiding it. And that is the part that took me the longest to make peace with. Because I spent a lot of energy in the early days trying to understand what I had done wrong. Whether I had been too trusting, too quiet, too easy to underestimate. Whether I should have been louder about who I was and what I knew. And what I eventually figured out is that none of those questions were actually about me. They were about my need to find a version of the story where the problem was something I could fix. Where if I had just been different, they would have been different too. That is not how it works. The truth is simpler and harder at the same time. They made their choices. I made mine. And the choices I made, to stay calm, to pay attention, to use what I actually knew rather than what I was being told to feel, those choices came from something Brandon had been quietly building in me for years. Not just the trust fund. Not just the marker signature. Though I will be grateful for that specific piece of paranoid genius for the rest of my life. He built in me the habit of believing that what I knew was worth something. That my mind was an asset, not just a support system for someone else's. That is what I want to say to anyone listening who has ever been in a room where someone was trying to convince you that you did not understand what was happening. You probably understood it better than they wanted you to. The people who work hardest to make you feel small are usually the ones who need you to stay that way. The moment you stop cooperating with that version of yourself, the whole arrangement falls apart for them. Felicity's story is ultimately about what happens when a woman is underestimated in her own grief. When people who should have shown up with casseroles and silence instead showed up with paperwork and a plan. And what happened to them was not punishment in any dramatic sense. It was just consequence. Their own choices, documented and returned to them by a system that does not care whether you are someone's mother or sister-in-law. It just cares what you actually did. I think about that a lot. The cleanness of it. Nobody had to be the villain in some theatrical sense. They just had to be exactly who they chose to be, and then they had to live with what that cost them. I am still learning how to build a life that is fully mine. But I know this much. Intelligence without integrity is just a sharper tool for digging yourself a hole. And grief, real grief, the kind that sits in a flannel shirt and a blue thermos on a windowsill, does not make you weak. It just shows you very clearly what you are made of. I think Brandon knew what I was made of. He planned accordingly. If this story resonated with you, leave a comment below. And if you are new here, welcome to Recovery Stories. Subscribe and stay with us.